There was once a time when two civilizations, the Hebrews and the people of the Nile, lived in harmony upon the fertile lands of the East, where lotus flowers bloomed along the banks of the continent's greatest river. But that peace did not last forever. The extraordinary growth and astonishing population increase of the Hebrew people began to stir unease among the ruling elite of the Nile. Fearing that their power might be threatened, they not only turned their backs on their former companions but reduced them to slavery, oppressing, exploiting, and ruthlessly controlling them for generations. When all hope seemed lost, a strange star appeared in the darkened sky. In that desperate hour, fate delivered a child, one who would later be known as Moses. Though born into rejection, he would become the sacred symbol of salvation and hope for a people standing at the brink of extinction. According to legends preserved in ancient scriptures, Moses was born during a time of great darkness when Pharaoh, given here the name King Orion, ordered all Hebrew baby boys to be killed, having heard a prophecy that one of them would one day shake the very foundations of his throne. To save her newborn son, his mother, Rebekah, placed him in a basket woven from reeds, sealed with pitch to keep it afloat, and set it adrift on the Nile, leaving destiny to chart its course. But the basket was not lost to the river. It was discovered by Princess Helena, daughter of Pharaoh, while she was bathing with her attendants. Moved by the child's innocence and strange beauty, she chose to raise him as her own, naming him Moses, a name possibly derived from the ancient Nile language meaning drawn from the water. In many ancient cultures, water symbolized not only a physical element, but also the sinful and uncertain world. Thus, the name Moses came to bear a sacred meaning, one saved from the waters destined to save others. Moses grew up between two worlds. On one side, the golden palaces of the Nile, where he was raised as a prince, educated in wisdom and bestowed with great power. On the other, the whispered memories passed down by his nursemaid and sister Miriam, reminding him of his Hebrew heritage and true identity. These whispers awakened within Moses a deep intuition that his destiny lay beyond royal privilege and luxury. Then came a fateful day. Moses witnessed an Egyptian soldier brutally beating a Hebrew slave to death. Overcome by rage and unable to contain the fire within his blood, he struck down the soldier and tried to hide his crime. But word of the killing quickly spread. Branded a criminal, Moses was now hunted. Pharaoh Orion, who once cradled him as a son, now declared him an enemy to be killed. Moses fled into the Sinai desert, a place barren of life, yet rich in spiritual revelation. It was there, amidst sun-scorched rocks and desolate sands, that he encountered the Invisible One, a burning bush that blazed but was not consumed, speaking forth the voice of the divine. In that wild place, Moses not only heard his calling, but felt the pain of his people, and he agreed to return and confront the supreme power of Pharaoh to lead his people out of bondage. From an anonymous child adrift on the Nile, Moses became the sacred embodiment of resistance against injustice. His journey was not merely the story of a nation's liberation, but a timeless symbol of hope and the strength of the human spirit when united with divine purpose. In the arid wilderness, as a wandering exile, Moses once stopped at a well in the land of Midian. There he witnessed a group of aggressive men harassing 7 young women who had come daily to draw water for their livestock. Unable to stand by, Moses intervened and defended them. That act of courage marked a turning point in his life. The women's father Jethro, a respected priest in Midian, heard of Moses' bravery and integrity. He welcomed the stranger into his home and treated him with honor. Eventually, Jethro gave his daughter Zipporah in marriage to Moses. They lived together in Midian, where Moses tended flocks for 40 years, as though the tumult of the world had faded into oblivion. But destiny does not allow a man like Moses to remain in peace forever. One day, while tending his sheep on the slopes of Mount Horeb, known as the Mountain of God, Moses saw a mysterious sight, a bush engulfed in flames, yet not consumed. Drawn by awe and curiosity, he approached. Then from within the fire, a voice called out the voice of the Almighty. The voice said, "I am the I am who I am. I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries under slavery, and I have come to deliver them. Moses, you shall be the one to lead them out of darkness and toward the promised land." Terrified and uncertain, Moses, still only a humble shepherd in exile, asked, "Who am I that I should confront Pharaoh's might?" But God granted him signs. The staff in his hand would turn into a serpent. His hand could be made leprous and healed in an instant, and he could turn the waters of the river into blood, a divine symbol of judgment. With these divine powers, Moses set out to return to Egypt, the land that once knew him as a lost prince. There he and his brother Aaron appeared before the new pharaoh, believed by many historians to have been either Ramses III or Merneptah. Standing before the throne, Moses declared the mission given to him by God: "Let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh refused. His response laced with arrogance. Not only did he reject the demand, he intensified the forced labor, making the lives of the Hebrew people even more unbearable. The people cried out in despair, but Moses did not falter. He returned again to plead for their release. When refused a second time, he performed his first sign, turning his staff into a serpent. Yet Pharaoh's magicians replicated the feat. Moses turned the river water into blood. They imitated that as well. He summoned thousands of frogs to cover the land. The magicians again mimicked part of the miracle. However, when the fourth plague struck, swarms of flies filling the land, the crisis began to spiral out of control. In fear, Pharaoh begged Moses to pray to end the plague, promising to release the Hebrew people. But as soon as peace returned, he hardened his heart once more and broke his promise. Then came the full force of the 10 plagues, a series of calamities unmatched in the history of ancient Egypt. The river turned to blood plagues of frogs, flies, disease boils, hail locusts, 3 days of darkness, and finally the most devastating blow of all, the death of every firstborn son in Egyptian households. Only the Hebrew families who followed a sacred ritual known as the Passover were spared. Throughout Egypt, cries of grief echoed in the night. At last, Pharaoh relented. He had no choice but to let the Israelites go. Thus began the Great Exodus. Moses led thousands across the desert toward the east, eventually reaching the shores of the Red Sea, where history and legend converge. But Pharaoh once again changed his mind. He summoned his full army, chariots, cavalry, and elite troops to pursue the people he had just freed. With the sea before them and the enemy closing in behind, the Israelites were gripped by panic. But according to ancient texts, God caused a mighty east wind to blow all night, parting the waters and creating a dry path through the heart of the sea. Moses led his people across. When the Egyptian army followed, the waters surged back, drowning every soldier. None survived. Many dismiss this as myth infused with religious symbolism. Yet scientists from the U.S. National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, and the University of Colorado have modeled the event using computer simulations. They found that under specific conditions, strong sustained winds blowing from the east could generate a wind set-down effect, temporarily pushing back shallow coastal waters and exposing land beneath. A rare natural occurrence, but not impossible. Whether a supernatural miracle or a rare natural phenomenon, the event marked a turning point in human history, and enslaved people oppressed for centuries were finally liberated. As the Israelites stepped into the parted waters of the Red Sea onto a path opened by the breath of divine wind, they could not have known they were walking the razor's edge between life and death. Modern simulations suggest that a steady wind blowing at around 100 km/h from the east, sustained for 4 hours, could indeed push the waters aside, exposing a stretch of dry land several hundred meters wide and up to 3 or 4 kilometers long, just enough for hundreds of thousands to cross on foot. This was not only an act of faith, it may also have been an exceedingly rare act of physics. Yet even scientists admit there are details beyond easy explanation. For instance, how could such a massive crowd pass through in the midst of such fierce wind? One intriguing theory suggests that the sheer size of the group may have created a human wall, absorbing some of the wind's force, allowing those behind to move forward in relative safety. Researcher Hyun-Ju posits that they may have hesitated at first, but with Pharaoh's chariots thundering behind them, they faced only 2 options: certain death or a sliver of hope across the sea, and so they walked. Then, as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, the Red Sea closed. The pursuing Egyptian chariots were engulfed by the returning waves, a moment both glorious and tragic, an eternal symbol of deliverance. Having escaped Egypt, the Israelites now faced the harsh challenges of the Sinai wilderness. Under Moses' leadership, they journeyed toward the Promised Land, a land flowing with milk and honey as God had promised. But the path ahead was far from easy. At Marah, where there was water, they found it bitter and undrinkable. The people grumbled against Moses. He prayed and God instructed him to throw a piece of wood into the water. Instantly, the water became sweet, quenching their first thirst in the desert. Soon after, their food supplies ran out. Weary and desperate, the people cried out, "If only we had died in Egypt. Better that than to starve here in the wilderness." Once again, God's mercy prevailed. Each morning, manna, a thin frost-like bread, fell from the sky. In the evening, flocks of quail settled around the camp. But the miracles did not end there. At Rephidim, they found no water at all. The people again grew hostile. Following God's command, Moses struck a rock with his staff and water gushed forth. In the dry, lifeless wilderness, a spring burst from stone, a miracle amid the desert sands. Before they could rest, a new danger emerged. The Amalekites, a hostile tribe descended from Esau, suddenly attacked. Moses instructed Joshua, a young and capable warrior, to lead the army into battle. Meanwhile, Moses stood atop a hill holding the staff of God. A strange phenomenon occurred. Whenever Moses held his hands high, the Israelites prevailed. But when his hands lowered, they began to lose. As he grew weary, Aaron and Hur stood by his side, holding up his arms until sunset. At last, the Amalekites were defeated. Not long after Moses led the people to Mount Sinai, the holiest site in their journey. He ascended the mountain alone, answering God's call. There he received the 10 Commandments carved onto 2 sacred stone tablets, foundations of morality and law for the entire nation. Accompanying him part way were Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders. They were the first witnesses to behold the glory of God. But only Moses remained at the summit, enveloped in divine cloud and fire, to receive direct instructions for the people. This was no longer a covenant with a single man, as it had been with Abraham, but a covenant with an entire nation. God declared, "If you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured people, a holy nation." The event at Mount Sinai was not only a defining moment in Israelite history, it also marked the formal establishment of Judaism as a structured religion. While faith in God had been passed down from patriarchs like Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it was at Sinai that Judaism took shape as a unified religious system. There Moses received divine laws, along with instructions for priestly roles, worship rituals, and the design of the sanctuary, all forming the core of Jewish religious life thereafter. But while Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and nights, the people grew impatient. They approached Aaron and demanded, "Make us a god to lead us, for we do not know what has become of Moses." Aaron collected gold from the people and cast a golden calf, declaring, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." The next day they held a festival, feasting, dancing, and worshiping the idol. This provoked the wrath of God. Moses pleaded for mercy and was permitted to descend the mountain to confront the rebellion. In his fury, Moses shattered the 2 stone tablets, the sacred covenant. He destroyed the golden calf, ground it into powder, scattered it on water, and forced the people to drink it. Then he stood at the entrance to the camp and cried, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me." Only the Levites responded. Moses commanded them to punish the idolaters, purging the sin from the nation. The Israelites continued their journey northward, reaching the plains of Paran, near the border of the Promised Land, Canaan. From there, 12 representatives, 1 from each tribe, were sent to scout the land. After 40 days, they returned, carrying a cluster of grapes so large that 2 men had to carry it. Though they confirmed the land's richness, 10 of them gave a discouraging report. The people of Canaan were powerful, their cities fortified, and conquest seemed impossible. Only Joshua and Caleb spoke with faith. "If the Lord is with us, we will surely overcome." But fear spread through the camp. The people wept, demanded to return to Egypt, and even sought new leaders to take them back. In response, God declared his intent to destroy the nation and raise a new one from Moses' descendants. Moses again interceded, and God relented. Yet he decreed this entire generation who rebelled shall not enter the Promised Land. They will wander the wilderness for 40 years until a new generation rises in their place. During that time, the Israelites continued to complain, rebel, and demand miracles. They rose up under the leadership of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, accusing Moses and Aaron of exalting themselves above the people. God instructed that each tribal leader bring forth his staff and place it before the Ark of the Covenant inside the tent of meeting. The next morning, only Aaron's staff had budded, it had blossomed and produced almonds. This was a divine sign that God had chosen the tribe of Levi for the priesthood. Yet even with this sign, the people continued to test Moses' patience. At Meribah, where there was no water, they grumbled, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt only to die here?" God commanded Moses to speak to the rock, but in anger Moses struck the rock twice with his staff. Water flowed forth, but God reproached him for his lack of absolute obedience, declaring, "You shall not enter the promised land." As the Israelites approached the borders of Moab, they asked for passage through the land of King Sihon, but were refused. War broke out, and the Israelites emerged victorious, taking possession of his territory. They also defeated King Og of Bashan, extending their holdings on the eastern side of the Jordan River. However, God made it clear Moses would not cross the Jordan. From the summit of Mount Nebo, he was allowed to gaze upon the promised land, the dream he had led his people toward for 40 years. Afterward, Moses gathered the entire nation and delivered his final sermon recorded in the book of Deuteronomy. He urged them to keep God's laws, warned of the consequences of forgetting the Lord, and pronounced blessings upon each tribe. In the end, Moses climbed to the top of Mount Pisgah, surveyed the land of Canaan, and died at the age of 120. According to Scripture, it was God himself who buried him, and to this day, no one knows the location of his grave. Moses is revered as the humblest man who ever lived and the greatest prophet in Jewish history. He served as the mediator between God and the nation and laid the foundations of law and morality for the three great monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The 10 Commandments he conveyed remain not only a framework of faith, but also a universal moral code for humanity. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not covet what belongs to others.